Welcome to bestia.dev. Learning Rust and Wasm programming and having fun. I just love programming. Today we will install CRUSTDE, containerized Rust development environment. The previous video on YouTube is 2 years old and outdated. This is an opinionated guide for beginners how to set up CRUSTDE, containerized Rust development environment. The isolation of the container will not allow Rust code to mess with your primary system. FYI. This kind of isolation is good but not perfect. For developers using Windows like myself, the guide starts with the Windows installation and describes how to configure WSL2 and install Debian. For good measure, there are detailed description how to install and config some programs I use for development like Total Commander, Chrome, Git and VS Code. We will skip the installation and configuration of Windows and Total Commander. That is my recommended and opinionated way of configuring that is there for your information. We will start with the installation of Git for Windows and VS Code. When you install Git for Windows, it comes pre-packed with Git Bash, a Linux terminal emulator. Git Bash is particularly useful because it lets you run both Linux and Windows commands from the same terminal and access the underlying Windows file system. SSH is great. In Linux, it works seamlessly. In Windows, it came late to the party and this brought some problems. Warning. There are many incompatible SSH solutions for Windows and it can be a mess if there is more than one solution installed. First, I removed the Open SSH components in optional features. Git Bash comes with SSH agent and I will use it just the same as in Linux Bash to avoid retyping the passcode every time. I want the SSH agent to start when I manually run the Git Bash console. I wrote a little script in bash rc file for Git Bash in Windows. It is recommended to use the SSH config file to assign explicitly one SSH key to one SSH server. If not, the SSH agent will send all the keys to the server and the server could refute the connection because of too many bad keys. I have already installed VS Code and the recommended extensions. The important part is to check the user settings. Now is time to install Linux on Windows. Linux everywhere. I chose Debian because it is stable, but probably everything works in other flavors of Linux too. After installation, restart Windows if needed. Install Debian and then update and upgrade it. I don't like that programs in WSL can see the files of my host OS Windows. With two configuration files, I try to disable that. After WSL restart, the Windows drives are not auto-mounted anymore, but the mounting points are still here. Unmount and remove them. Git and SSH are essential to developers. We need to securely access our remote repositories on GitHub and our production web servers. All over SSH. The installation of Git brings SSH with it. From Windows with Total Commander, copy your existing SSH keys into WSL Debian. Change the permission of private keys to make them more secure. Add the prepared SSH config file with the nano editor inside Bash. I use right-click inside the terminal to paste the content of the Windows clipboard. This is a functionality of the terminal, not of the nano editor. Nano is a very simple editor. The arrow keys, delete and backspace work intuitively. Nano uses Ctrl-O to save the file and Ctrl-X to exit the editor. In Nano, Ctrl-K deletes a line. In the same fashion, add also the prepared files ssh-add and bash rc to WSL Debian. We finally prepared all the prerequisites to install CRUSTDE, containerized Rust development environment. Copy the incantation from the GitHub page to the Bash terminal on WSL Debian. This will install curl and download the Bash scripts for CRUSTDE. We already prepared the SSH keys. Now we have to personalize the installation with 6 parameters. 3 for access to GitHub and 3 for access to your web server. Let's run the installation. First we install and configure Podman, the alternative to Docker. Now we can create the CRUSTDE pod that has 2 containers. On first run it will download a few gigabytes from Docker Hub and store it in the cache folder. We must run a script to initialize the pod after reboot. We will run ssh add in git bash to store the private key in Windows. Finally, we can start VS Code from git bash. It will connect to CRUSTDEV over SSH. Let's make a hello world example with cargo auto and automation tasks. Open a new VS Code project simply from the integrated terminal. Nice. Edit cargo tom.l with your data. Edit the GitHub repository URL. Run the standard automation workflow commands: build, release, doc, test, commit, etc. After every task, I kindly inform the developer what to do next. The sequence of automation tasks is always the same. The first commit task will initialize the local repository and create a GitHub remote repository in one go. It will need the GitHub token for access to the API. The GitHub remote repository is working fine. It is now possible to push commits also with the VS Code integrated source control. The cargo auto template and automation tasks are a great start for a new working project in the CRUSTDEV container. This is all for today. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Find my code and tutorials on bestia.dev and GitHub.